Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sunday stream, the fourth part of our look at the panel discussion from 2010 at Oregon State University on critical race theory, with the goal being to see what were the core tenets of critical race theory in 2010, how do they compare to today, in the absence of the current, let's say, hysteria and high-profile nature of critical race theory in the current discourse. That'll sound like intelligent and stuff. I try. Welcome to Sunday. Hope everybody's doing good or well, or at least better than bad. It's good. Everyone loves a log. So where did we leave off last time? Well, right in the middle of question time or Q&A at the panel. I have brought us back to the very second we left off last time, after our third student spoke about a litany of things that I didn't have a whole lot to do with anything, but just him wanting to say what he wanted to say. Not really a question for the panel. I really do hope there are more questions for the panel and not just soliloquies from students that just want to be heard and hear themselves talk, but I guess we will see. But before we get into that, who's joining me today? Well, first and foremost, Officer Buck, thank you so much. Hi. Well, hi, Officer Buck. How are you? And beyond that, Matt Barnes, Mr. Tickle Trunk, Ryan R., Zalbla, Dr. Keeve. Who else is here? Jamie Melquist, Mr. E, Decode, Arc 210, and let's see, Scuba Guy Steve, Rerum. I almost said Red Rum. Re-Rum Trading? Let's see. Yeah, so hi, guys. So let's see. We're going to get right into this now. Oh, check your logic. Hello. So there's about half an hour or so, or just a little bit over, left of this presentation. Regardless of how long I have to go to finish it up, this is going to be the fourth and final part of this series. So that all being said, I'm thinking we'll still make it somewhere in the neighborhood of about an hour and a half, but who knows? Depends on how much is said and how much I have to say. So with all that being said, let's begin.
I wanted to make a comment about you're saying, well, whiteness is a more recent race.
Okay, so again, I did the best I could with the sound quality, and it all depends on how the speakers are, holding the microphones to their mouths. But he's first off, can you guys hear that? I'm gonna make sure I got everything lined up. Yeah, he's saying something to the effect of going back to how whiteness is a recent race. I think he means like concept or something like that, but I guess we'll find out. You guys hear that okay? Barely, but yeah. He's got to hold the microphone closer to his mouth. As we've seen before, the sound isn't that bad as long as everybody's sticking to the rule of, talking into the microphone.
I remember I actually was having a conversation with my friend who went to high school with me. He's a student at OSU right now. But we're making a comment when we took our SATs and when we took our AP history test and AP English tests, and they have the little information bubbles that you fill in. There's the one that says race, and I'll say like Asian American Chinese, Asian American Japanese, African American, Latino, and this is just Caucasian. And I just thought that it was, they just lump you're white into one thing. And we were actually just talking about at what point did Caucasian become a race?
Well, as far as I know, Caucasian is just a derivative or associated to Caucasoid, which is the sort of taxonomy of species and trying to differentiate between the various evolutions of humans. So, like, what were they? Were the Caucasoid, Amerindian, Negroid? I forget what they were. I had a really good anthropology teacher in high school, and we went through this several times, and so I'm reaching far back into my memory, but that's my understanding of where Caucasian comes from. It's just a general classification, differentiating everyone on the basis of both race and then nationality as a separate category is kind of odd, because then I mean, it would take forever, right? To be like Caucasian German and Caucasian French and on and on and on. So that's my understanding. If I'm incorrect on that, by all means, leave me a correction in the comments or in the chat if I happen to catch it.
Having that said, I wanted to address Dr. McMahon real quick. I understand the viewpoints from the I see no color perspective. I can understand why people would say that.
Okay.
And then I also understand the importance in not destroying your culture.
Well, okay. Practicing a non-judgmental philosophy when it comes to race is not destroying a culture, unless you associate race with culture. But then if you associate race with culture, then a white Texan has the same culture as a white Frenchman. I think any reasonable person would say these two people, native born to their countries and or their states, as the case may be, do not share the same culture, even though they may share the same skin color. So, yeah, I'm going to push back a little bit on the student there.
And the importance of realizing that everybody has unique culture and not to let go of that. Given the two things, like identifying yourself as a human being, as I'm a human, you're a human, we shouldn't be treated any differently. Is there a way to encompass what that is aiming at without destroying culture? So is there a way for us to identify as I'm a human, you're a human, with still respecting and identifying with your culture? Is that ever possible?
Okay, again, the flaw in the question is that you're conjoining race with culture, as though race immediately denotes a culture, which it doesn't. And that by assessing somebody outside and without making race a determinative factor in your assessment, you're somehow hurting their culture or denying something inherent about their culture, their character, their history. Your skin color is not a history. It does not intimately define anything about you just on sight alone. And it's already off base because the teacher, the professor, was going for the literal pathway in the phrase colorblindness. He was ignoring the principle of it. And yes, I suppose it is a very poor phrase to use, colorblindness, colorblind theory, etc. I'm at a loss to think of a more catchy and efficient phrase for it. But regardless, the professor is willingly ignoring the principle of the idea and going for the literal. So I'm curious to see how he answers this guy's question, as in, how, if not colorblindness, how could we just assess one another on the basis of common humanity without destroying culture? Yeah.
It's a great question, and I'm sure folks would have different opinions on the panel. I think it's like anything else. I think when you talk about diversity, you've also got to talk about community. You've got to talk about how we're similar and how we're different as well. Both. I think if you just talk about one, it's a false dichotomy. It's trying to say it's this or that. Well, it's both. We got to talk about how we're similar and how we're different. I think that when one side or one perspective gets left out of the discussion, then we're in trouble.
What does that mean? One side gets left out of it. Just acknowledging somebody first and foremost before anything else comes up as a human being. Well, what am I supposed to do when I meet someone? Do I interrogate them on the intricacies of their background, of their culture, of their growing up? I mean, I always ask this question: how does this work in practice? Right? How does this work in the real world? I had an argument on Facebook several years ago regarding cultural appropriation. And there was an article about someone who had, I think they were wearing like some reggae gear or something, and they weren't black. And someone said, well, that's cultural appropriation. You shouldn't do that. And that's wrong. And that's actually, that's a crime against society kind of thing. And I asked this person, I said, well, what would make it okay for them to wear that? because somewhere in their comments they talked about, without a good reason or something like that, and they were very vague. And I said, okay, well, let me ask you something. If you saw me, regular standard looking white guy, if you saw me walking down the street with a tattoo on my arm of a Native American Thunderbird symbol, okay, what would you assess of me right then? Am I in the wrong? And they said, well, it would depend on why you have it. And I said, okay, well then how would you go about determining whether or not I am a good person in this context? What would you do? If you saw me just walking down the street with a Thunderbird tattoo on my arm, would you interrogate me? And then if I gave you an excuse or a reason, would you believe me? How does this work in practice? How does this work in interpersonal communication one-to-one? So in that sense, I have no idea what our professor means. How do we assess, who we are and that we're common in humanity, but we also have to, if we ignore our culture and everything else, what does not ignoring culture in meeting someone mean? How does that, how do you become the good person interacting with someone in this version of things? That's kind of my overall question.
Then we're in trouble. The default that I've heard from a number of faculty and a number of people in general is this whole notion of the human race and stuff like that, that there is, I don't see color. Well, I just, if you go to, there's an implicit, what's the implicit association test out of Yale or Harvard, implicit bias thing.
Ooh, implicit bias. Boy, now this is back in 2010, before implicit bias, unconscious bias, all these things became hot buzzwords. So this could have been sort of the initial cauldron where all these ideas started becoming more prominent. If he's having to search his memory for the phrase implicit bias, we really do know that we're back in time, don't we? Let's see. There was a question a second ago. Dr. Keeve asks, Scribelight, do you really have that? Oh, a Thunderbird tattoo? No, I do not have a Thunderbird tattoo. I just came up with that as it's an example of somebody possessing something from a culture that you wouldn't assume they belong to, but that they also can't just take off, right? They just can't get rid of it. So what do you do as an individual who is working under the operation of cultural appropriation? What do you do with that person at that point? How do you interact with them? How do you assess them if you believe that anybody who you think doesn't deserve to be sporting anything or emulating anything about any culture that you think they're not a part of in some way, etc. So I came up with an extreme example of cultural appropriation that couldn't just be easily, change your hairstyle, take off that shirt kind of thing. Anyway. Oh, what's that? Monkey sent you. Yes, I saw Monkey was streaming earlier. Well, thank you, Monkey, wherever you are, if you happen to show up. Is this a Monkey raid? Is everybody coming back over for Monkey? Did he time it just to send people over here? How nice of him. Monkey and I are friends. All right.
Where you go online and images flash up and you pick is this a positive or negative image and stuff. You've seen that probably. This notion that you don't see color, I got to argue with that. I got to say, no. I think you do see color. You do see color, right? I think you do. And
everybody's a racist. Everybody assesses everybody else on the basis of color. This is the world the professor lives in. And he thinks there's no way around it. It's just a given forever. Okay.
I think that when we work through that, or maybe we were able to get to the other side, but I think that becomes this default position and it lets us off the hook because it's one of the many things. I've been in a diversity workshop. I don't need to learn anymore. Some of my friends are black. I don't need to go to this workshop. I took Jerry's class, so I'm pretty hip to this stuff. I don't have to worry about it. I sat in on one of the study circles. I should be fine.
All of those things are lies. All of those things are insufficient for you. I mean, what would be, I wonder, sufficient evidence? Because obviously someone saying these things is having to defend themselves against the accusation that they are racist or they're assessing people on the basis of color, right? All those things you just listed off, those are defenses against an accusation. I've asked this in the past before. What would be, if someone bothered, and I don't think people have to bother, but if someone bothered to try to defend themselves against an accusation like that, what evidence would be sufficient enough for someone to effectively leave them alone? Because we've seen time and time and time again of people jumping to a conclusion about a person and then finding out something about their lives or their families or their past actions or something else that would tend to disprove the accusation all on its own, and yet somehow it still sticks.
This is an ongoing process that lasts for a long time. And I think we got to be open to this notion of community and diversity both, and this notion that I don't see color as a good end state for us to end up in.
I'd like to add one thing, and that is I found really helpful to me reading an article that's readily available online. It's called Spotting Detours for White Anti-Racists.
Spotting Detours for White Anti-Racists. Just want to digest that for a second. Spotting Detours for White Anti-Racists. Okay. Juggernaut says, I actually do have a Thunderbird tattoo. It's the logo from the 1956 car that my father restored and was his prized possession. After he passed, my sister and I got them on our forearms. Yeah, that was one of my examples in the argument I had with the person on Facebook was, you know, if you came up to me, I mean, if you're actually practicing what you're preaching, you're going to like determine, because somehow you're the jury and judge in this, determine whether or not my possessing a Thunderbird tattoo is legitimate. What excuse could I give that would satisfy you? And the couple that I came up with was, one, I have Native American history in my family background, and that's just sort of recognizing that. Or two, it's a memorial tattoo for someone else or something else or whatever. But even then, it's like all you have is my word. Is my word enough to forgive me the sin of possessing what is, in your opinion, verboten material on my person? Right? Whether it's a shirt or a hairstyle or a tattoo or whatever. Who decides what is legitimately displayed on a person based on culture? It's just the most ridiculous notion in my mind of how that actually works in practice. I mean, if somebody on the observation side just sort of, griping about it, it's an internet complaint. It's not something that actually works in real life in a real way. But yeah, so, but that aside, my condolences on the passing of your father. My sister and I have talked about sort of getting mutual tattoos for different things at some point in our lives where, it's not something we want to contemplate all that often, but if we were to get sort of family/memorial tattoos, what would those look like? I think just the notion of not wanting to dwell on that event is causing us to avoid actually getting too serious about it. So anyway, moving on.
And it goes through a list, I think it's 17 different commonly held beliefs or things that are commonly said by European Americans that are ways of not really dealing with race or racism. And the I don't see color is actually listed as one of those ways of just, denying that it's an issue and never getting to wrestle with it.
Okay. Not seeing color is not denying the existence of racism. Not seeing color is not participating in the ideology of racism. Okay. Not using skin color as a determinative factor in assessing someone does not also mean, oh, racism doesn't exist. That's nonsense. And anybody who says otherwise is being nonsensical. But here we are.
As a real lived experience for people of color. So it might be interesting to folks to maybe look for that, Google it, and find it. It's pretty easy to find.
So on that basis, then, any person that I see, that I come across, who is not obviously white, I must then assume that they are a victim of racism flat out. Right? I mean, that is the conclusion I have to come to. I have to first approach anybody who happens to not be visibly white as a victim of racism. Okay.
And I think there was the woman in the red shirt. You had a question, I think, a while back.
The red shirt, she won't survive long beaming down to the planet.
Say that I wanted to hear the last part of what Diane Blue had said, because my mom is a chronic interrupter, but I kind of lost.
They better hand her a mic because I can barely understand what she's saying. She said something about her mom being a chronic interrupter. I don't know where this is going.
Which guy? Oh, okay.
Okay, yeah, I don't know. You know what's weird? Even though I'm wearing headphones, I'm leaning towards the screen as though somehow that's going to make me be able to hear her better. Reflexive, anyway.
She had missed the last part of your comment.
Oh, my last point was that I disagree with Du Bois respectfully. I believe that ultimately we are first animals before we are rational beings. And so we identify with such irrational things as skin color. And so that there is a white race. And really what holds that race together, in my understanding, is yes, there might not be a shared history per se, but a defining moment, I believe, is the scientific revolution, where all of a sudden we could subject the whole all of nature and life to our reason, and anybody who did not think that way was a barbarian and had to be educated and retrained. And so I do see that. I can pinpoint it just about in any setting that I find myself. So.
Okay, now this is, again, kind of a recitation of what he said last time, that it was one unifying cultural touchstone for the white race, as it were. It'd be the Enlightenment or something like that. Scientific revolution, scientific development, and then the contrast and conflict with that sort of a watershed event in humankind against every other culture on the planet, let's say. And when it comes to Europeans of the Enlightenment era and so on, I'd have a hard time disagreeing. That is certainly a driving force for a lot of things that happened in the course of our history since that point. So does that mean that all white people are thus connected the same and think the same now, or ever really, but just have sort of common thread through shared culture at the time? It's hard to say. Historically speaking, like I say, I don't have any way sort of to disagree with that in the broad strokes. How applicable it is today, that'd be a tougher hill to climb for me.
There's a question back too.
Whoa, I'm thinking of the title, The Unbearableness, Unbearable.
The unbearable lightness of being, which has been, turned into the unbearable whiteness of being in several places.
And that evokes a lot in me. I was raised in the whitest country that I think of.
Oh, Norway or Finland?
Because it was a country with no colonialism, and there was no other colors around. I never saw different colors of people until I left the country. It's not like this now. It's all mixed. I'm talking about Switzerland.
Ah, Switzerland.
I'm talking about Switzerland. Come closer. And so I have a very naive view about when I was 14-year-old, we were being asked to at school to write about what our missionary is about, and I honestly wrote a little bit whimsical, but also very serious, that missionaries were people who were going to Africa to learn rhythm that we had lost, so they can bring it back to us. And there's some, I thought about this naive story about when I was 14-year-old.
Yes, you were 14 years old in a bubble of a nation in a decidedly different time, given what I can only assume is this man's age at this point. Yeah, it's going to Africa to retrieve rhythm they had lost. Okay.
Often in my life, because since I lived in America for all my adult life, I'm seeing the whole question very differently.
Okay.
And God, this is so subtle. What Du Bois says, that white is not a race. And then I was thinking, isn't that an example of ideology? This statement like this. So
yes, it is a statement of ideology.
It keeps us always to talk about it over there. And I feel the whole atmosphere is always talking about this stuff in concepts. Everything is kept in concept, and here I'm safe.
What?
And that is the difference. That is the white thing that has been developed, the European thing that has been developed.
What?
To project everything in concepts. The rest of the world live in their body. And that's the point about coming back to learn rhythm and to learn to be part of nature. We have objectify nature over there. And to the point of that we are afraid to be dirty, to live with nature, to deal with dirt, etc.
Okay, the way he's expressing himself is a little off, but okay, I'm going to try my best here. I think he is saying treating everything else as an outside concept, a separate way of being rather than part of the whole. So like when he was living in Switzerland in a bubble, in kind of an echo chamber and sort of an isolated, little habitat, everything else, what's outside of Pleasantville, right? Everything else is some kind of abstract concept. I think that's what he's saying, and that's a problem in his mind. And depending on how you look at it, I suppose I could agree. At least I think that's what he's saying. I'm doing my best here.
And I happened to be reading a book by an African just this morning, and I was thinking, I'm going to this tonight, and the page where I was reading was so appropriate that I just wrote it down. I mean, just a few notes, which is, as a non-Westerner arriving in this country, America, for the first time, it is struck by how little attention is given to human emotion in general. People appear to pride themselves for not showing how they feel about anything.
Okay. Well, not showing emotion. So stoicism, I guess. He wasn't saying not having emotion, but not expressing emotion or acknowledging emotion.
As attractive as the modern world is, with its material abundance, it is repulsive with its spiritual and emotional poverty. And that sort of gives a clue about what's wrong with being white.
Okay. What's wrong with being white? Do tell.
And I felt all my life a sense of deep guilt of the fact of that I have a white. Well, I agree. I didn't think of myself white, particularly raised in Switzerland. But then when I met other races, I became aware, oh, I'm white. I've got to remember that.
That's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that you now classify yourself on the basis of skin color instead of seeing skin color as just as relevant as eye color and hair color. But okay.
And with it came a responsibility of horror.
Oh, geez.
Inevitably, because of learning history and how indeed the white people totally exploited the rest of the races.
So, you living in Switzerland, you now have a responsibility to history for white people in other places that did things before you were born and that you had nothing to do with. I've heard this refrain for a long time too.
As you know, so it's inevitable to not associate with this, and therefore, is there anything redeeming about being white?
Is there anything redeeming about being white? No, there's nothing any more redeeming about being white than there is to be convicted of being white. It is a neutrality. It says nothing about who you are. It does not denote a character flaw nor a character benefit. It is functionally neutral as a determinative factor of what kind of person you are. And if you believe that it does denote something about what kind of person someone is, you might be a racist.
That's been the question all my life. And I think that the redeeming aspect, I proposed it once to some Indians in Hopi land.
You proposed a redeeming quality of being white to Hopi Indians. I can't wait to hear this one.
And they appreciated it a lot. The white folks who were present was furious. But I think the gift of white is to transcend altogether the idea of being a society, a race, indeed, an ongoing thing that we went, a culture. What is this culture?
No. Well, okay. Transcending the idea of being a race. So if you're talking about making the idea of race as a line of delineation between people an irrelevancy, if that's what he's saying, then I agree in spirit. But that goes right against everything that our panelists were talking about in saying that race is an identity. Race is a unifying aspect of people, that you are both complicit in the overall guilt of people who have committed crimes in the past with your skin color, and you are also part of a shared legacy of oppression if you happen to share a different kind of skin color. So they're promoting a unification on the basis of race, but you see the redeeming quality of being white as moving past race. Oh boy.
Because this culture indeed has lost its association with being part of nature and part of the spirit. Everything has become a concept.
Yes, there is no culture amongst white people. Again, someone in Texas and someone in France and someone in Russia, they're all the same. They all think the same. They all operate the same in the world. They see the world the same way. They have the same traditions. They have the same foibles, and on and on and on. Never mind the obvious distinction of language. Yeah, it's all the same, homogenized completely.
They don't know who they are anymore.
Yes.
Here, it has to be conceptualized. Otherwise, there's nothing there. There's an emptiness that has to be filled with, I don't know, with cars and furniture and romance and drugs.
Yes, the absence of any notion of culture in white people creates a void in them that must be filled with materialistic pursuits and drugs. Okay.
Whatever. I mean, that's the history. What is the fact of the white race at this time? And anyway, so what I propose to the Indian is the idea of the individual.
The idea of the individual? Okay, well, this ought to be interesting because, again, our speakers almost to a one were promoting collectivism on the basis of race.
That is a whole new gift that came from Europe.
The idea of individualism is a gift that came from Europe. Okay, again, I am not a cultural historian or a world historian, so I don't know how much of that is true or accurate. So I'll just let it go. At least Deco in the chat, you want to skip this dude? He seems a little off his rocker. Well, I don't know how off his rocker he is, but he's part of the discussion, and I'm curious to find out how the panelists will either react or comment on it after the fact, given that he's saying things that do fly in the face of what they've been advocating for, previously.
And there are very few who know it. I mean, it comes from very specific people like Jung or, antennas that have been transcending this whole white race to a point of, is there anything redeeming about it? And it can, I agree, it cannot be a race. The gift is to become an individual.
What? Okay, well, I mean, I wish they would take his mic away or cut him off or something, because now we're just into rambling territory. Why aren't there questions being posed to the panel? Why is everybody giving their soliloquy?
So I was thinking of the title of tonight, which is the unbearableness of being. I'm not white.
I'm not white? Okay. Well, what are you?
It's the wrong verb.
The wrong verb. And again, admittedly, this is not his first language.
We are being.
Yes.
It is being is being. It's a great mystery.
Oh boy.
We cannot conceptualize being.
Okay.
We must not concept.
Yeah.
And this is where the white race falls.
Okay,
I mean,
you lost me, dude.
So-called.
I think you lost everybody.
Culture that has been doing what? Destroying the planet. And that's where it is at now. That's why I'm having a certain urgency about all this. It can be talked about.
Wait, the white race is destroying the planet, not humans as a collective, entity, but the white race specific. Did I hear that right?
It is something very crucial now with us and a sense of urgency that should really disturb us.
Yeah.
Give us fever.
Take his mic, somebody.
Emotional fever about the whole question that you presented. And I thank you very much for what you all.
Just have one more question. We gotta.
No, could we have a question? Because the only persons, I take it back. No, there's only been two out of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Out of the 6 people who have spoken so far from the audience, only 2 have actually asked a question of the panel. And that's very disappointing to me. And there's still like 20 minutes left in this deal.
Wrap things up here.
I think
And
there was,
a hand
she
back
had a
there.
hand up.
He's had his
I'm
hand
not
up.
sure who was
Carl.
first. I think over here was.
Can duke it out.
I understand.
Whoa. Oh, that just about blew my ears out. Okay, let's. Please don't tell me that's going to be how it is, because I'm going to have to turn the volume down for myself.
Over time, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this as quickly as possible.
I think the caught up with him there for a second. Thank you, GunsFox61. Scribe, that guy needs to be put in a state mental health center. No, I think he's just got a lot on his mind, a lot to say, and obviously English is not his first language. And I mean, I kind of got threads of some of the things he was trying to get across, but just like everybody else in this audience so far, save for 1 or 2 people, he's there to pontificate rather than discuss anything. Obviously a guy with a lot on his mind and seemingly a lot of pent-up guilt over him being a naive 14-year-old. I'm not sure. Thank you, Gunfox. All right, let's see what our loud speaker has to say.
This is a topic on race relations and equality that hasn't been very much discussed in tonight's discussion.
Okay.
But to get things clear, I'm very pro-equality.
Mm-hmm.
And something that I'd like to bring up was just something within the past decade was in the state of California when Gray Davis was in office.
Mm-hmm.
The Congress decided to implement a system, not implement, I'm sorry, to discontinue the affirmative action policy.
Right.
And according to a book, Hating Whitey by David Horowitz, a large portion of the African community called it a step back in history and a racist act towards the Black community.
Mm-hmm.
The book also stated that the campaign to oppose the discontinuing of affirmative action, they flew in a former KKK leader to address the audience, saying this is, like I said, a step back in history, and it is a racist act. And my point is, does affirmative action, is it a good message that it's sending into all minorities that, white people, that you have to work this hard, whereas minorities, you can work this hard, but still you'll get accepted to educational institutions as well as corporations? And
wow, now this will be an interesting set of answers from the speakers. Like, should race be a qualifying aspect for someone outside of merit? Should you take people on with individually as what they can do and their individual merits, or should you value race? I think I can guess what their answers will be, but we'll see in a second. Thank you, Gay Rascal. Arkham Asylum Live Roundtable. Man, wouldn't that be interesting? If you just had, I'm sure it's actually happened in the comic book sometime. You just have all the villains sit around, just chat. I know there was that one episode of Batman the Animated Series where they all sat around a table talking about the time they almost got Batman. My favorite was Killer Croc. I won't tell you what Killer Croc said because I don't want to ruin it. You can probably find the clip on YouTube. Thank you, Gay Rascal. All right, so affirmative action. Is it fair? Is it good? What says our panel, I wonder?
For the sake of equality, should America prohibit racial preferences such as college funds and clubs, organizations for corporations, educational institutions? And is it necessarily a bad thing to not see color and see the inequalities and the effort put forth by the individual?
Ooh, this strikes at the heart of the entire thing, right? Whether or not to use skin color as an assessment factor in someone's value or merit. And he's for equality, our student, which, if you do away with affirmative action, is actually more about equality, because affirmative action is about equity. It's about equality of outcome, not equality of opportunity. So what say our panelists?
This is directed to all you guys, and I'd like to hear your take on any.
Yeah, Maybe I can start a little bit and then I'll open it because I think that there's a lot to speak to that. There's a really great article by George Lipsitz called The Possessive Investment of Whiteness. And I think that one thing that he does really well in that article is really sort of outline how there's been a historical culture, a systemic sort of reinforcement of privilege, which we're all addressing here, right? In terms of economy, in terms of housing, in terms of rights, and all these sorts of things that have sort of privileged over a course of history white folk, right? And so in the face of this very long-term systemic support for this one particular racial identity, we have now these sorts of small gains that are being made, right? Mostly within the past 60 years even, right? Civil rights movement, and these sorts of changes that are happening to address a long period of wrongs, right? And so I think things like affirmative action sort of offer these small sort of glimpses where the system is sort of trying to be righted, right?
Righted, right. Okay, so the bad state of the world is when white people were valued and elevated because they were white. Right? I mean, regardless of anything else, they're white, they have privilege on the basis of their skin color. That's bad. Okay. So the way to fix that is to institute a system that values skin color. Instead of just treating everybody equally and taking everybody on their merits and ignoring skin color as a factor in assessment, we're going to fight fire with fire. Okay.
To make up for these long histories, these genealogies, these, for example,
doing something good today in response to something bad that happened in the past that you had nothing to do with does not make up for anything. It doesn't fix it, doesn't erase it, doesn't make it better for anybody that actually went through it. But that really is the question. Are you actually changing history that is no longer applicable in our laws, by doing something that you feel is good now because it makes you feel better?
Histories of people that have had access to education, right? And so, you know,
Well, she really reflexively needs everybody to affirm and validate whatever she's saying. It's that little nervous tick of asking right at the end of every sentence or statement.
To ask whether or not it is unfair at this point, whether or not one group is being privileged over others. It's instead maybe asking the question, where is privilege? How do we really define privilege? Is it something that's more about the immediacy of the situation, or is it something about a long-term issue?
What?
For example, I don't know, we haven't talked about this with anybody, but we might think about how many of us in this group are first-generation college students, right? Would we define privilege, I think, to own all of our own privilege, right? As educated people, where does that privilege in our family lines start? Does it start with my generation, as in my case, where I'm a first-generation college student?
That's not the question he asked. This has nothing to do with the question he asked. He's talking about assessing someone on individual merit versus assessing someone for opportunities in education and business with race as a elevating or denigrating factor in your chances. That is what he was asking. Is that a good thing? You aren't anywhere near an answer to that question.
Or does it start, further back with multiple generations for any one of us? And, how do we as a contemporary culture start to address these very long-term wrongs? So that's where I would say, and I think that maybe somebody else could speak to the specificity of legalities and things like that, but that would be one thing I would urge you to look at George Lipsitz's account of that.
Okay, without knowing whatever is the content or context of George Lipsitz's whatever, didn't even come close to answering that man's question at all.
Okay.
Affirmative action is a remedy. It is intended to be a narrowly tailored remedy to address past wrongs.
Uh-huh.
If you take the position that it is no longer needed, and I'm not sure that's the position you're taking, then you are in effect saying that the playing field is now level. Everybody has an equal chance.
Well, how equal a chance does anybody have if you're going to use race as an assessment factor? I mean, how do you create a level playing field unless you level the playing field? That is the contradiction in my mind is running up right against a brick wall in this one, in what you just said. So you want to institute a system that evaluates someone on the basis of something that has nothing to say about their merit towards a job or towards a position in a college, because you want to create a level playing field. Okay, when does the level playing field happen then?
And I don't believe that's true.
Uh-huh.
I think that people often confuse affirmative action with quotas, which it's not, and also with the idea that if you admit a person of color, for example, to an educational program as an affirmative action type admit, that you're letting in somebody who's less qualified than a white applicant who doesn't get the opportunity.
Well, maybe that's why you should just do away with race as a factor in that judgment. If you just look at someone's merit, absent any cosmetic factors. Can you imagine thinking about putting into place a level playing field that does not make use of things that say nothing about someone's merit? I wonder if she even hears what she is saying right now, how this makes sense to her with what she's saying she wants to have happen, yet she promotes this idea.
And affirmative action is not about lesser qualification.
Then why is race even considered? Why is there weight given to race at all? If a factor of someone's makeup that says nothing about their merit is being used as a value factor in judging them for placement in a school or in a job, why is it there if not to make a decision between two people of equal merit? Or equal or lesser. I don't know. I don't know how the schools do it half the time. And it's not about quotas? Really? Well, then what is it about? What is the goal? To address the wrongs of the past? How? How do you address the wrongs of the past? By assessing people today on things that have nothing to do with what they can do, just but what they are. Never quite understood that logic.
I think there is some stigma associated with being perceived as someone who, quote, took advantage of affirmative action.
There's a perception of anybody being put into a place of prominence or opportunity on the basis of anything other than their own merit. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about race or if you're the boss's nephew or something. Okay, nepotism, preferential treatment over actual ability or earned stature, there's always been a stigma on that. It's got nothing to do with the specific nature of affirmative action.
And so that's a concern. And I know some people who have declined to identify themselves as being anything other than white, if they can, appear to be, or to not invoke or list their race because they don't want that stigma. That doesn't mean their task isn't a more difficult one than someone who is of European American descent. And I think you asked a whole bunch of different questions.
No, he really only asked one question. At the core of it, he only asked one question. Should race be a value factor in assessing someone for their placement in school and or business? That was it. And you're saying, yes, it should be. It's a very easy question, and you've given your answer in a long form.
in your remarks, and I'm not sure that we can give sound bites that would really address those issues, but I think they're important ones to talk about. And if you can find venues where you can talk about it further, I would definitely encourage you to do that.
How nice of you. He asked the question and you gave your answer. His question was not all that complicated. I think you might have made your answer more complicated than it needed to be, because I think even you kind of maybe sense the contradiction in what you were saying you want to have happen versus what you're saying should happen. Thank you, Gunfox61. Scribe, whatever happened to earn stuff with the sweat of your brow or the strength of your back, i.e. work hard for something and not just be given? It's still out there. You know, it's still out there. But as we know, life isn't fair. You've got somebody who works their entire life at back-breaking labor, salt of the earth type person, right? Gets up every morning, does their job, you know, farms the field or works as a janitor or whatever else. And then you've got some kind of like VTuber who makes $1 zillion in a few months doing, as far as actual labor is concerned, very little in relation to somebody who actually works for a living, so to speak. And this is just how it works. This is just life, right? Sometimes somebody can do everything right, do everything that they're supposed to do, and things don't work out. Or they run into the one person who's decided to take a dislike to them. There is no cure for the unfairness of life. But I'll tell you what does not contribute to the equality of opportunity, and that is assessing people on the basis of skin color, one way or the other. So I know that's not the question you asked, but that's the answer I gave. I'm in tune with our panel. Oh boy.
Are you going to jump in here? Because I want to go before you, because you know more about this.
No, go ahead.
I'm an education prof, but I don't necessarily deal with higher education policy. And
wow, your self-esteem issues are really showing there.
Dr. Pratt has. I want to give the answer that accepts the terms of the current debate.
What?
To the question about affirmative action, and then I want to give the answer, which is actually my understanding of how these policies actually came into being, not how they get rationalized publicly.
Okay.
The first is objections that affirmative action policies, because they are built to give extra points to somebody on a test score, is therefore an unequal policy or doesn't actually advance inequality. Is premised on the really problematic notion that those tests actually measure people equally and are, in fact, any sort of rational or reliable measure of somebody's ability to contribute to a college community or benefit from that education. That's simply false.
Okay. How so? I'm coming at this blank. I mean, don't get me wrong, standardized testing has had a history of all sorts of problems and things, but how does if he's referring to standardized testing, and I think he is, how does standardized testing, how does the test discern the quality of someone on the basis of their skin color?
The actual correlation between SAT scores and what people do with their careers and whether they graduate is really, really weak.
The correlation between what people go to college for in getting a degree or otherwise and what they end up doing in life is always pretty weak. I got an English degree. I work in information technology. I knew a guy who went in to become an electrical engineer, and he hated it when he got out of college and happened upon a photography studio one day and found he had a passion for photography and became a professional photographer. You know, his electrical engineering skills helped him in setting up the lights. And so that was useful. And sometimes in my job, what little I retain from my English education is used in typing up blog posts or at least communicating with emails effectively between myself and clients. What does that have to do with anything? That is a non sequitur.
We probably shouldn't be using those tests. But because they're cheap, like cheaper than sitting down and interviewing everybody and making some sort of really complicated moral assessment of who's worthy of an education, we let the tests do that work for us.
It's not, a moral of who's worthy of an education. What? Thank you again, Gunfox. LOL. Yes, you're tuned in with the panel, but the line I was going for along the lines of giving someone something's based only on race and nothing else. Yeah, well, like I say, it should not be the factor on which anyone is assessed for their character, their culture. Like, you can know something about the nature of their quote unquote lived experience or whatever else, as we've heard over and over again from panelists like these and many, many, many subjects I've looked at in the past. Yeah, you should end up with what you earn. Are you going to earn the exact same thing as someone else who even does the exact same thing that you do? No, because different circumstances are different for different people at different times. Are some people unfairly treated by life and by other people? Yes, every day, every way. Can you cure that? No, we don't have laws in place because we believe in people. We don't have rules in place because we trust one another to do the right thing at the right time. Laws are the confession of the fallibility of human beings. So yes, I believe that people should receive what they earn and they work for. How that ends up panning out person to person, individual to individual, you know, it becomes a complicated question because, like, for example, if you inherit money from a relative, right, it's money that they earned in some way, shape, or form that you did not. So on the basis of everything you should get should only come from your merit and your hard work. If you truly believe that, then you would take that inheritance and, well, give it away, right, to charity or something. But then what is a charity if not helping people who in some way, shape, or form cannot help themselves? Should they be receiving that? This is the push and pull between your personal philosophy and then how you manage it and everything else. I don't know. And I'm not going to make a judgment call on someone if they actually accept that inheritance and put it in their bank account. Right? I wouldn't blame somebody for that. I wouldn't fault them for it. If they've never worked a day in their life and have an attitude towards others that is based on never having worked a day in their life, that's different. The real dividing line comes down to how do you treat yourself and how do you treat others. Right? All the other stuff is extraneous. It just doesn't mean anything unless you decide to make it mean something. Anyway, I'm starting to babble myself. I might as well be an audience member of that panel. Thank you, Johnny Hellcat. My sister went to college for a telecommunications degree. She ran a daycare for about 15 years. Yeah. Yeah, you know, where you start out, where you think you might go, oftentimes is not where you end up, because that's life. That's just how life works. You know, it's a rare person who knows exactly what they want to do, has a passion for it, loves it, wants to do it the rest of their lives, and ends up in that position and does it forever. You know, and more power to them if they find that for themselves. I mean, God knows I've been looking for it most of my life. What is my passion? What do I like to do? What could I find joy in doing, either as a hobby or as a job? Strange thing is, I kind of enjoy doing this. Should I be on radio? I don't know. Anyway, thank you.
Which kind of gets back to your point that the scientific revolution creates an ideology that allows us to dehumanize people, and then we can call them all the same, and that being whiteness. There's a relationship here. So if you're going to say that
dehumanizes people, calling them all the same, I mean, looking past race and just on humanity, what? I'm confused.
Affirmative action is at some level unequal because it involves giving extra point boosts here or there.
Yeah.
And that's fundamentally unequal. That's premised on the idea that those tests are actually fair and equal, and they're not.
No. It's premised on the principle of assessing someone on the basis of race and setting aside personal merit. That's not what that guy was asking. He's asking if it is fair, is it right in schools and in the workplace to give extra preference to people on the basis of race. That was the core of his question. And I guess your answer, as well as the lady at the end, is yes. It's perfectly fine. It is acceptable. In fact, it is preferable. Okay.
Okay, so that's accepting the terms of the debate. But my understanding is that affirmative action isn't designed to redress past wrongs.
What? Well, okay. If you mean that affirmative action cannot change history, you're correct. But the rhetoric that we've heard on this panel and that I have heard for my entire life is that affirmative action is in place to address past wrongs, to change the system. So I can't wait for this.
It's not a moral compensation, not the way it actually came into being. In a very weird way, I found myself on the faculty of Senate Affirmative Action Committee as an undergraduate at Texas A&M University.
Uh-huh.
I was in the student senate. They needed a student representative on this committee for some reason, so they picked me.
Uh-huh. Every time this guy talks about himself in some way, shape, or form, it's always very self-deprecating. It's always sort of self-undercutting. I really wonder about this guy's self-esteem. I really do. And I'm not being humorous about it. It's just one of those observations.
And what I learned in that committee was really valuable to me is that there was a federal mandate for Texas A&M at that point to have a more diverse student body, more representative as a state.
So you mean a quota?
But also an overall conception that if the state of Texas did not successfully educate its African-American and its Latino population, then you would have an increasing stratification, not just across class differences, but across race. It would be a political and social problem for the entire state. So there's an imperative for the entire state and for the nation to educate everyone so that our ideal and our illusion of a meritocratic society could be maintained. A very reactionary conservative agenda is advanced by having a pool of citizens that can be pointed to as successful, so we can point at all the other people that aren't successful and say, see, it's your own damn fault, right? So that's why we need to have a mixed group at the university going on to good middle-class careers.
Wait a second. So the conservatives want everyone educated in the country so they can point to a meritocracy and separate people on the basis of merit? What? I am honestly confused here. Educating the whole country is a conservative conspiracy to divide people and make other people lesser. Okay.
Now, the way the universities choose to deal with that is they compete through affirmative action scholarships for the suburban, highly assimilated students of color all over Texas.
So it's a quota.
So people didn't want to go down to the Rio Grande Valley and find people who do not code switch into standard English. They wanted to go to the suburbs of Houston and Dallas and find people who were code switchers or spoke standard English, etc., and were already very able to come into a university community and not disturb the normative culture there. So affirmative action protects the university from having to change to deal with actual diversity.
Actual diversity. Well, I'm sure he won't do it, but then you're going to have to define for me what you mean by diversity. And Lord knows I have heard many, 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 many definitions. So people who don't speak English that are people of color versus people who speak English who are people of color, they are not adding to diversity if they speak English already and if they come from certain zip codes. Is that what I'm to understand? So, okay. If affirmative action was based on class, if it was based on economic status, that would be different. But that's not what it's based on. Or at least not classically speaking. You know, merit-based acceptance, admittance, and scholarship with an eye towards class opportunities. That would make more sense, because class is something you don't have a whole lot of control over, right? Class does not define your ability necessarily. Neither does race. But class is something that is more of that's an opportunity situation. If you can't afford college, but you have all the merit of someone who can afford college, why shouldn't you have that same opportunity? That's a decent argument in my mind. But he's not talking about class here. He's talking about whether or not someone can speak English or is in the right zip code. Okay.
We will have real diversity here when we bring people in whose cultural discourses and registers of speech and registers of thought are very different, and we engage them as equals.
Okay, well, I understand that this is taking place at Oregon State University and not Texas A&M. That is a very interesting way to define diversity. So I would be very curious to know, if he ends up saying, what mechanisms he would put in place to achieve real diversity at Texas A&M or any college. What filtering factors would he use to accept students into school that are not necessarily meritorious?
We have never gotten anywhere near that. And affirmative action is actually a way to avoid doing it.
So you're against affirmative action. Okay. So it's not skin color, it's the tests. It's not skin color, it's speaking English or being in a different zip code. But affirmative action doesn't actually solve anything. Okay, so you are against affirmative action?
So go ahead and dismantle affirmative action, which I'm not in support of.
Wait. Go ahead and dismantle affirmative action, which I am not in support of. What? Talk about someone's beliefs or values or principles being, what's a good word? Chameleonic. I don't even know if that's a word. Probably isn't. There's probably a better word. I'm just going to use it because I came up with it. That's my English degree privilege. Chameleonic. That is the word I will attribute to our speaker's rhetoric.
But you're going to find yourself back to the same set of problems that faced a society that doesn't want to deal with the real substance of diversity and invented affirmative action to avoid dealing with it. So that's the more...
And I said this when he was speaking the first time on his turn at the wheel, so to speak. He sounds more and more like a zealot the longer he talks. Like, not making any sense, but being very passionate about it. Yeah.
I'll touch on it real quick.
Oh, what's this? What's this? Dr. Keeve, it's underlined in red in chat, but apparently it is a real word. Well, hey! Hey! Is it chameleonic? See, I was hoping I was the inventor. But I guess I can't get that creative. Oh well. Okay, so affirmative action is bad, but you're not against affirmative action or taking it away, because affirmative action doesn't actually lead to a solution. In fact, if you took away affirmative action, everything would go back to the same as it was before, whatever before was, because our society is inherently racist to begin with, and would just go back to people on the basis of white skin versus any other kind of skin, despite all the laws that we have and everything else. So what is to be done? Well, you nullified both options, so I'm not quite sure. Anyway, onward.
And you should be interested. My office, Institutional Equity and Diversity, is hosting a panel series just on affirmative action in the fall. So look for that. I'll do a little tooting of my own horn on that one. And it's been my experience that as far as university policies on affirmative action, legally, we can't hire you because you're Black. What the institution has been able to do is been able to rationalize using additional dollars to bring those people who traditionally aren't at the table to the table for the discussion of, would you like to come to the university for as a faculty, or would you like to come here as a student?
So the hiring practices of the college aren't actually racist. They're just making sure that they extend invitations to people on the basis of their race.
So as far as the notion that the people who are actually coming here, people of color who don't have the credentials to make it, completely false. So what those dollars have been able to do is bring those very smart, very dedicated persons to the table, so that we can at least engage them and bring them here or wherever else.
Okay, that entire thing confused me. We can't hire you because you're black, but we will use the money we've been given to reach out to. So are you extending opportunities specifically to people on the basis of their skin color? You're not making it a deciding factor in the hiring process. You're just sort of giving the invitation to people. How is that not? Okay, I'm, again, very confused. That was it? Okay.
Well, just to, I also happen to be in the dean's office of the College of Arts and Sciences this year. And just to echo what AJ and Jerry said, the university, for example, treats affirmative action as a very narrow policy that has to do particularly with hiring, and there's, there are guidelines and so forth. But the diversity issue is a much broader thing, and it's about doing what Jerry said, which is to bring people from different perspectives in, because there's something that we gain from having these sorts of conversations, and to encourage folks by way of providing resources, admission opportunities, faculty hiring practices that reach out to include more faculty in the searches and so forth. These are all part not of redressing wrongs, so that's part of ultimately what happens. It's actually about just engaging diversity, because that's how the world is.
So if you are of a different color than someone else, you have a specific perspective that is valuable. So skin color helps define ways of thinking. All right, so Donald Trump and Joe Biden have the same perspective. Okay.
And that our sort of flourishing depends on our being able to do that. So, I mean, this is I think what's behind the university diversity plan. It's not about just establishing affirmative action in a legal sense. It's actually about diversifying, making the university a different place.
So it's about quotas. It's about the aesthetics. It's about the visible makeup of the population. What else could it be if not a quota? Visible or statistical?
I think it's also about improving the educational experience of all students. And there's a book, I forget the name of the authors, I should know better, The Shape of the River, which did an extensive study of college students paying attention to the diversity across several college campuses, and finding that students of color and European American students felt that they had received a better education the more diverse racially that they were.
Okay. Thank you, Chicago Mike. Scribe, I think they need to rename this panel discussion to Word Salad Panel. Word salad bar? I don't know. Yeah, it's very confusing. But okay, so the students across these colleges with more quote unquote diversity, however you define that, felt they got a better education. Did they get a better education? I mean, feeling you got a better education, it's one thing. What were the outcomes? What were the graduation rates? What were the what were the test score averages? Things like that. What metrics could you use to show that? And then, even if you could, would you be able to draw a line from those results to the racial makeup of the college campus? I'd be very interested to know if that was part of this book and or study.
Than those that were in mostly white campuses and educational situations.
Whoa. You said diversity. What does white have to do with it? If the college is mostly black students, shouldn't the results be the same as a college mostly of white students? Why fall on quote unquote white colleges or white campuses if it's about diversity? Unless, again, you have a very interesting definition of diversity.
You don't have the breadth and richness and diversity of experiences, culture. If you tend to be an all-white institution, or mostly, that you do if you do some outreach to bring others who haven't traditionally been at the institution to the table to go through that educational experience together.
Yes, because when you have a whole bunch of white people in the room, there is no diversity. You know, they're not individual people with individual backgrounds who may even come from different countries with different experiences and different perspectives. Their skin color unifies the quality of their thinking, of their value, of their contribution. Got it.
And so they also found that the students of color in those colleges, in fact, did well, that it wasn't a situation of bringing in people who were not qualified. I mean, that's the stigma thing, again, is that, you know, if you're a person of color, you must be here only because of affirmative action, not because you deserve to, and you took some more deserving white person's place in doing that. And
well, that is the poison of affirmative action and or quota systems, both in schools and in business. If you make a statement, as many companies and many organizations have, that we are aiming for 50% gender equity in our board of directors by 2025. Well, if you've set a quota, then in order to maintain that quota, you're going to have to elevate people first and foremost, and or lower them on the basis of gender, won't you? You can't maintain a balance on the basis of a non-meritorious factor without discriminating against people on the basis of that non-meritorious factor. Or am I missing something? And that is the poison of an affirmative action or a quota system statement when it comes to populations and businesses and other organizations. You put the question into the mind of people because it is your policy to put that question to yourselves when you are assessing people for placement, isn't it?
And that's a false, it's a myth. And I think that the book also indicated that the students of color who graduated turned out to be more active in their communities, in the communities generally, in terms of giving back to community, and tended to be successful in their endeavors after they graduated. So that's another perspective on affirmative action. And it also brings to mind one thing that Tim Wise has said.
Oh yes, Tim Wise, oracle of all white guilt and white vilification.
And that is, he gives an example of, has anybody ever complained about the legacy admits, those who have parents or grandparents who have previously attended a university, getting that their children get a leg up in some form or fashion.
Has anybody ever complained about that? Boy, howdy, they have. Yeah, nepotism. You know, giving preferential treatment for people against necessarily their own merit. Has anyone ever complained about that? Yes. Are you saying that no one has? Or I'm sorry, are you saying that Tim Wise says that no one has? Also, just a note at the timestamp here, and this is the completeness of the recording that I had access to. We're coming up on just under a minute left in this talk. So I don't know if this is actually the whole complete talk or if they wrap it up right away. I guess we'll find out in a second.
Or if their parents have donated lots of money to the university.
Yeah.
Do their children get special consideration of some sort
Yes.
that displaces somebody else? So,
Well, okay, do they? And if they do, is that fair? If someone is put into place of an opportunity, not on the basis of their own work or merit, but on the basis of something that has nothing to do with their own work or merit, is that fair, whether it's money or skin color? If someone was given an opportunity on the basis of their being white and for no other reason, I would think you'd have a problem with that. I would think any person of a reasonable mind in the modern day would have a problem with that. So why is it okay to discriminate on the basis of race at all?
again, goes back to that idea of this is not exactly a meritocracy. And until it is, we need to be doing something to get it to a point where it can be.
How do you achieve meritocracy if you weight people's opportunities on the basis of non-meritorious factors? How do you achieve a place of egalitarianism if you institute systems that counter that completely? That would be my question to the panelists. I can only imagine what kind of answers I'd get.
Well, unfortunately, we've gone long past our concluding time. I apologize to those of you who didn't have a chance to ask questions, but I appreciate the attendance tonight. The community conversations really depend on your engagement, your intellectual curiosity, your courage to discuss these questions. I'd like to invite you to thank the panelists for a wonderful.
And I'd like to pose just one small hypothetical, and this is what keeps me up at night, and so I want to share the burden with all of you.
Oh boy.
And it directly tags on to what we're doing. So if you were to take transplant, I don't know, 5-10 people, whether it be white, black, Latino, it could even be Mexican, Nigerian. If you were to take them from birth and move them, let's say, to Mars to have them create their own kind of society, what keeps me up at night is thinking, would they perpetuate the same types of stratification that we have here? Would things be completely different? How would their society evolve, develop? It's just something that keeps me going. My answer to that changes almost daily. So enjoy.
Would human beings taken out of all the culture of Earth create a society that had differentiation on the basis of something between peoples? Yes. You know why I can say that? Because of all these separate and completely disconnected cultures that existed and thrived on this planet, one from another. In every society, from Europeans to Native Americans to South Americans, whatever, a system of stratification of either class or privilege or monarchy or whatever eventually comes about, because human beings are pattern-seeking mammals, as Christopher Hitchens often said. And part of those patterns is recognizing ability and or differences and so on and so forth, and the human ego and the need to succeed and on and on and on. All these things would lead to some of the same aspects we see in ourselves today and in history. That's just human nature. So I have an answer to our speaker's question. Yes. Would they be the same things that have alighted upon ourselves as differences? Well, I don't know. It depends on what happens on Mars. But yes, there would be something. Would it be race? Couldn't tell you. It'd be something, though, because I have faith in humanity that we know how to treat each other differently for no good reason. But that's it, guys. That is the end of the critical race theory panel from 2010 at Oregon State University. Not the most efficient question and answer time as I had hoped for, but all the same, kind of interesting in some of the answers the panelists gave to some pretty straightforward questions and or challenges. That last one about affirmative action was very telling. But I'll give a couple minutes here for anything you guys would like to add. And oddly enough, came in at just around an hour and a half. That's nice. While I wait for any sort of, and be sure to, if you have something to say or something to ask, plenty of question marks and exclamation points, depending, so I know it's for me and I can display it. Waiting for that. If you would like to hear more from me or Satsu 2 Cents, we'll be on Satsu's channel tomorrow night, Monday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern for the Lords of the Night, where we will talk about the news of the day, news stories you submit, what we've been up to on the internet, and then your questions and comments, some of which I'm looking for now. Let's see. Asian Research Directorate. I would think a multicultural mission to Mars would be focused on surviving. Yeah, that would be a first thing. I think he's talking about like completely separating people. Like, well, I mean, the true experiment would be to send babies to Mars, and somehow they grow and live and thrive all by themselves without any outside influence from Earth or Earth history or Earth culture and that kind of thing, and see what happens, right? And if such a thing could happen, again, I would say that yes, eventually, inevitably, human beings would develop different ways of evaluating one another and having discriminatory practices of one kind or another. That's, I mean, human beings on Earth before we had all the culture. What does the history of humankind tell us? The history of humankind tells us exactly what would happen on Mars. It'd just be a reset. You know, granted that Mars is a place that could be survived on in the first place and so on. Dr. Keeve, how about plenty of words like the audience members in the video? Yeah, if you want to just put like your doctoral thesis in a series of chat messages, go ahead. And it'll all wash over my brain like all those other soliloquies that we heard. Let's see. Ryan R. It seems affirmative action is hardly ever talked about. Has that become a foregone conclusion? I mean, it's talked about. It's been in the news relatively recently because of legal challenges from Asian American groups that charge that they are being discriminated against because they're Asian in favor of other non-white races in colleges and things because of the statistical pattern of Asian students being very good academically, and therefore that puts them in a higher tier of, you know, consideration for colleges, which is unfair to anybody who's not Asian. But yeah, so yeah, it's not talked about that much these days, I suppose. It's not like a key button issue at present, but it's still out there, you know, and different states have different policies on it. That, like the student mentioned, back in 2010 and even recently, affirmative action in California has been a topic of debate because I forget exactly what this current situation is, but they had eliminated it and now they're trying to reintroduce it, or we've talked about this on the show before and I'm currently blanking on the details. So don't trust me. Look it up for yourself. Hi, I am Steve. Scribelight, do you think they would acknowledge the fact that they were contradicting each other during this panel? If they were having a debate amongst each other, then maybe. But since it was just everybody saying their piece, I wouldn't have imagined anything sort of that adversarial. And professionally speaking, I don't think there was any place necessarily for it. If it wasn't, if the basis of this event was not a debate, then one of the speakers saying their piece and then moving on to the next one and letting the audience sort of decide or assess is perfectly valid. Now, did I think they would? No. Should they have? Well, no. I mean, a couple of them pointed out like I might differ from this person, or my knowledge might be different than that person. So no, I don't think there was anything lost there. I would have rather seen this panel split up into two teams and debate something rather than just, giving 20-minute diatribes about themselves or what book they love or something, but whatever. Mr. E, how would a hive mind debate with each other? I'm convinced those are the Borg. Well, if they were put to the test of actually having to state their position and stand on it, and then be forced by the nature of the event to have to exchange these ideas with one another. Like the lady at the end of the panel saying affirmative action is, the greatest thing since sliced bread and it's necessary and everything else, with the other guy who was like, affirmative action is completely useless, but I'm not saying it should go away. That might be something, to have people who otherwise seem to share a whole bunch of the same values and perspectives, but on this one thing, completely in contradiction to one another. I mean, that was the only sort of, and admittedly, I don't remember everything from all the other parts of this so far. That was the one point at which you had two speakers who were on opposite ends of the argument from one another, sort of, even though I don't remember his name, but the male speaker kept contradicting his own contradictions because he didn't want to take a position. I don't know. It's very confusing. Arc 210, I figured White Hat guy was going to go harder in the paint, but he just fizzled out. Yeah, he was kind of quiet there, except for, the one guy asked about color blindness and everything. That was obviously his forte. Yeah, I was surprised he didn't speak up about affirmative action, but oh well. Yeah, White Hat guy, he had the most sort of bluntly ridiculous presentation as far as I'm concerned, but what are you going to do? Let's see. Lexi Mads, I'll prepare to rage when Scribbles ignores me, LOL. Stupid Benadryl, I'm getting so sleepy. I am ready for your rage, Lexi. Sounds kind of creepy when I say it that way, doesn't it? Okay. Another minute or two here, guys, then I'll wrap this up. If you have anything else you'd like to add, please do so. If you're listening to this in the future, by all means, leave your comments in the description, in the comment section below. I do enjoy reading them. I don't always respond to everyone if there's nothing for me to respond to, but I do appreciate them, and I know that a lot of the people that come in after the fact appreciate them as well. Gay Rascal, the hive mind should just give us the formula for clean energy and transwarp drive, then leave our star system. Oh, man. Space travel, technological advancement. If only we were all putting more of our energy and thought and passion into things that were much more beneficial than debating the value of race. It always feels like we're taking, 3 steps backwards for every step we take forward, Let's see. Dr. Keeve, she wants you to rewind to the beginning of part 1. Well, fortunately for Lexi Mads, and fortunately for everybody watching in the future, you can do that yourself right now, because all of these are part of a playlist on my channel called 2010, A Critical Race Theory Odyssey. You can find all 4 parts there. If you caught this one out of order for some reason, you can find the other ones there. And like Lexi Mads always wants to do, rewind to the beginning so that you can be enlightened in totality. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me on this Sunday. I hope you are all safe and well. If you're not well, please get well soon. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things, even though everyone is so well behaved. You have very little to do. Everyone who donated, thank you so much for your generosity. I really do appreciate it. And since I already went out of order of my usual outro, I'll say it again. I hope you're all safe and well. If you're not well, please get well soon, guys. And I'll talk to you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.